First of all, I would like to appreciate and give my special thanks to you all and those who are working behind this webinar. Personally, I know that this is a very, very relevant subject, and you guys are doing a very great job to affirm justice, peace, and reconciliation in our community. And also, this is a good platform, especially the virtual platform that is preparing for those who are very interested to do justice, peace, and other kinds of humanitarian activities. That is a very grateful thing. And I appreciate all your efforts and all your academics and all your scholarship. And may God bless you all, and God bless you abundantly for this kind of things in future. Thank you. Thank you, Roshney. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, you are the God of peace. Help us to make peace and have peace in our relationship with others. Give us forbearing and forgiving spirit. Keep us from being quickly offended. Control both our temper and our tongue. Help us not to be quick to condemn what to do not understand. And when people think differently from us, help us to remember that they have right to their opinions, and help us to treat others as we would have them to treat us. Help us to do all we can to bring peace in the world. When we meet those of another race, color, political affiliation, or religion, help us to treat them as friends and not strangers. Help us to see our nation's greatness not in the light of exploiting other people, but rather in serving them and bringing them to a place of liberty and wholeness. Help us through our prayers, conduct, words, actions, and generosity to witness the day when all will know and love you. Let the day come when all will see your children worship you as their Father. Especially, Father, we pray for this webinar and pray for those who are working behind this program. And especially, we pray for those who are attending in this webinar. Lord, enable us to do good for humanity and for justice and peace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Achin.
Thank you, Roshney.
So some announcements before we get lecture of today's seminar. We have a new name. So when we did our first seminar, we were the Marthoma Youth for Social Justice. So this name is inspired from all the verses in the Bible that, you know, allude to light and darkness, and we want to hold Jesus in our hearts, and you know, he is a light, and we want to follow the light. So this name is intended to reflect that youth are lighting the way to the future, towards our future. And so I want to quickly introduce the Light the Way team. So right now we have working on the content, providing the content for you guys is me, Sheldon Paratundia. Sheldon, can you wave? Is he waving? Okay, Ashley, Matthew, Ashley, if you, yeah, and Ruben Matthews. And then our communications team is Shreya Jacob, Sneha Matthew, Beba Wilson Matthews, and Shobit Raju. If you guys want to give a quick wave too. And then we're also being guided and you know, supported by Achin, Reverend Monsi Varghese, Dr. Anil Varghese, and Dr. Chandramani Chakraborty. So these are our teachers and guides. So whenever we need help on any of these concepts that are, you know, how to present it, these are our teachers. So we are, you know, this project is being guided by great support systems. Anil Uncle and Chandramani, they're very, very knowledgeable about history in India, here in North America, Asia. Like they're, you know, I learned everything I know from Chandramani. She was my professor. So yeah, so we're very, very lucky and blessed to be able to have them part of our parish and as guides and teachers of this initiative too. So I just feel so lucky and blessed to have Achin and Anil Kunchandramani with us too. We are looking for more people with content and video editing skills to join the team. So, you know, we want to put out some good stuff. Like we want to make infographics, summaries of the lectures, fun videos for Instagram. So please reach out if you are interested. And if you haven't already done so, join our Facebook group, Light the Way Discussion Forum, and sign up to have the seminar links and recorded content sent directly to your email. So please be patient with us because, you know, we are a small team. We are all volunteering our time. We do have other responsibilities and obligations to keep up with in real life too. So we're kind of working out the you know, all the hicks and you know, working through the developing a more like a bigger system. But everything eventually will, you know, be smooth and flow nicely. So yeah, so if you're able to sign up, access these seminars. And a note for everybody, please be aware that the seminar lecture portions will be recorded so that those who miss the seminars can still learn and you know, get what they can from the lecture, but the discussions that we have in seminar will not be recorded. Yeah, that's just to ensure everybody's privacy, and those who don't want to, you know, be on camera, they shouldn't have to. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I got there. We also wanted to go over the group guidelines for our seminars. This was developed for this seminar space and also our Facebook discussion group. These guidelines are meant to ensure that this is an open and welcoming space where we are open to learning and understanding the perspectives of other people, and especially those who are most marginalized. So we are trying to be active listeners and really, really try to engage ourselves in our own growth process. So the number one rule I think that I would definitely, you know, want to stress above all of them is that this is a safe space and a judgment-free zone. So this forum is meant to encourage everyone to educate themselves on issues of justice. We are all learning together. There are no stupid questions, and this is a safe and judgment-free space for all. So please, if you are concerned about, you know, you're feeling shy about any questions that you might have on the content or the material, please don't, like, there's no such thing as a stupid question. So our discussions are, you can participate in the chat or through voice or send anonymous questions to Ruben Matthews. So we'll get there, but
huh? Are you joining separately?
Yes, I'm talking. Sharon, can you turn off your mic?
Oh shit, okay.
Thank you.
You're using the pause it?
So number 2 is keep an open heart and an open mind. So this forum is for people to learn and develop understanding and empathy for others. Participants must keep their hearts and minds open to alternative perspectives and commit to being active listeners. So yeah, just as we, you know, learn the perspectives and of other people, those who are, you know, not of our community, we need to keep an open heart and an open mind. The rule number 3, youth speak first. So elder participation is always welcome, but this will be a youth-led initiative that prioritizes and gives space for youth to speak first. So we're never going to, you know, discourage elders from participating, because anybody who wants to learn should be able to, but they should be aware that this is primarily a space for youth to engage with other youth on the issues of our time. Number 4, each seminar is going to engage in the question, what would Jesus do? So we're supposed to think, you know, as we discuss these concepts and the issues of our time, what would Jesus do? Seminars and discussions will be rooted within Christian faith perspective and highlight Jesus's teachings of radical love for all. Number 5, think critically about our history. So discussion should unsettle the common misconception that colonialism made us better. We organizers, we strongly believe that colonialism we need to question colonialism from the onset in order to address systemic injustices around the world. So we really do have to think critically about our history and understand how the past is connected to the present in order to build our future is what the intention is. Number 6, work towards unpacking our privilege. Discussion should be intentional about thinking critically about anti-Blackness and anti-Native sentiments in our own community. We will work together to unpack our own internalized anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism. So I think as privileged minorities, you know, a lot of us who, Malayalis who have come, or if our families have immigrated here, it typically means that, you know, we have a good socioeconomic status. So, and, you know, there are ways that we perpetuate anti-Blackness and anti-Native sentiments in our own community and in the larger Canadian community. So we really need to work on unpacking our own privilege. And of course, we're gonna do that together. No one is gonna be alone on that journey. Yeah, so number 7, we're make connections to our own lives. Discussions will bridge connections between what we learn in seminars to current events, our lives here in Canada, and the wider systems we're all inadvertently a part of. So we will try to bring in, you know, the current news as it relates to the content. We want to keep these seminars relevant. So we will do our best to make the connections in the discussion portion as well as the lecture. And finally, the last guideline we have here is number 8, connect intent to action. So participants are highly encouraged to raise awareness and support grassroots organizations that assist Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities all around the world. And so this, every seminar we do intend to have an action item to, you know, to promote and encourage you guys to think about supporting. So, and also eventually down the road as a group, as, you know, like the way initiative together, we might also discuss how we might, as a group, support a local organization in whatever ways we can. So yeah. And I really want to stress that these guidelines, like, as we do this work of learning and unlearning what we've been taught, we will get uncomfortable, we will get uneasy, a lot of emotions may come up. So I think it's really, especially, you know, during 2020, during the pandemic, when so there's a lot of high stress situations going out in the news and in society in general, we really do have to ask ourselves, what if 2020 didn't break us, but it recreates us and restores us? Because when we allow for growth, we become better versions of ourselves. So these guidelines are meant to facilitate and support each other's growth and learning. So again, this is not something we're doing alone, we're doing it together. So yeah. Now, I want to take the time to acknowledge some lives that are no longer with us and say, you know, rest in peace and power. And I want to say their names. Ijaz Ahmed Chowdhury is a local Mississauga man. He was on June 20th, 62-year-old Ijaz Chowdhury was shot and killed by police in Mississauga, Ontario during a wellness check. He had schizophrenia. And then right next to him, right here, is Chantel Moore. So on June 4th, Edmundston police force officers fatally shot 26-year-old Chantel Moore, an Indigenous woman originally from BC, after they were called to conduct a wellness check. And she was one of 2 people to die at the hands of police, one of 2 Indigenous people to die at the hands of police, I should say, within the span of 8 days. So, yeah. And then the week before Moore's death, Regis Korchinski Paquette, over here, a Black Indigenous woman living in Toronto with Nova Scotia roots, died after falling from a high-rise balcony after her family called police for help. This was another wellness check. So yeah, we really do have to kind of really think about, you know, what we really call the police for, I think, right? Because wellness checks, you know, mental health issues, we do have to, I guess, ask ourselves if that is the police's responsibility to look after those kind of issues, right? And how can we better support members in our community who do struggle with mental health issues. Down below here is Elijah McLean. He was detained on his way home from picking up an iced tea for his brother, and he had a childlike spirit. A lot of his clients had said he lived in his own world. He was never fitting in. He just was who he was, and he had anemia and always would get cold, so he would wear an open ski mask. And so the police, a call was made because somebody thought this boy he looked threatening walking down the street, and the police used brutal force to secure him, and McLean went into cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital. And his family said that he was brain dead and covered in bruises. And I think particularly for Black and Indigenous people, I think we really have to understand how these like wellness checks and encounters with the police are very particularly difficult for these communities to manage. In Canada, out of 461 police deaths between 2000 and 2017, 70% of that number died during encounters with the police, and they suffered from mental health or substance abuse problems. 70% out of 461 police-related deaths, and that's Black and Indigenous people in Canada. So yeah, there's I think a lot to figure out, to unpack for us to understand why these injustices are happening, and that's what this space is for. And lastly, I want to acknowledge Praveen Varghese. This is a case that hits close to home for us, because he is a Malayali. In 2014, he was found dead in the woods near his university, and Gage Bethune, a white man with whom Praveen was seen with before his death, was convicted for first-degree murder. But September of last year, the judge overthrew the verdict in the case, and Bethune was released from jail and remains out on bond. So he is walking free, and Praveen was 19 years old when he died, and it devastated the Malayali community when the news came out about his death, because he looks like us. He looks like my brother. He looks like my cousin. He looks like the boys in my church, and he looks like the boys in my samajam, right? So when the news came out, the police had said that Praveen was drunk and perhaps intoxicated with drugs. He was at a party. He got a ride from an acquaintance, and then he ran off in the woods after a fight. They would not look further into the details of the case. They were not arresting Gage Bethune, So Praveen's mother and father, his family, his community, they fought to get his story heard, and they fought for his justice. His mother had said, I wanted the world to know that my son was not a drug dealer. He was not drunk. He died because he was hit. I did not want Gage to be put behind bars for his life, but yes, I wanted him to know that there are consequences to your actions, and I want the law to hold him accountable. Recently, Lovely Auntie, who is Praveen's mother, she gave an interview on Facebook for the group Malayalis for Black Lives Matter, and it was an incredibly powerful interview. I want to play some of it because I think it's really important to recognize how, Malayalis think that this stuff doesn't affect us, but it really does. And I think Lovely Auntie's experience, her family's experience, seeing Praveen, it really does hit close to home. So, like she says in her interview, these are some quotes that I pulled out that I thought were very powerful, and I think that all Malayalis need to hear. If any one of us Malayalis think that it's not going to happen to one of us anymore, they are so wrong. So many people in our community think that it always happens to somebody else. We all live in a bubble and we are very comfortable in it. She also said, we see racism in our workplace, but I think as Malayalis, we have learned to put a blind eye to it or just laugh it off when you hear things. And as Malayalis, we suppress everything because we want to be good in everyone's eyes, you know? But what I've learned in the past 6 years is that no matter how educated you are, how polite you are, when it comes to things like this, only thing that matters is your skin. And, you know, Praveen is light-skinned, you know? So like, imagine some darker skinned Malayalis, right? I think it's Gage Bethune, when he saw Praveen at night, he didn't know that he was a Christian. He didn't care about that. He didn't care that he was brown, that he was Indian, that, you know, he was a model minority. He saw different colored skin and he thought other, not of my community. And he saw a threat, right? And so I really want to just point out these pictures, because these pictures, you know, his family on vacation, his school pictures, him and his sisters, this picture of him posing, you know, showing off his kicks. These pictures look familiar to us because this could be our family, you know. So really, again, these issues do impact us, whether we think it does or it doesn't, you know. They definitely do, and that's something I think the Malayali community really, really does need to understand. Okay, so before we get into the discussion about the movie 13th, I want us to kind of explore these concepts of power, knowledge, and discourse. So Michel Foucault is a French philosopher, quite well known, and very influential for a lot of academics and theorists alike. So he kind of developed this this concept of the power-knowledge dichotomy. So he argues that power and knowledge are impossible to detangle from each other. Knowledge is an exercise of power, and power is a function of knowledge. And so we really kind of have to think of these two things as related. Power and knowledge, they go hand in hand, right? If you have knowledge, you have power. If you have power, you have knowledge, right? And the ways in which knowledge is communicated and used as a way to control others is I think what we kind of have to dig towards and unpacking. And so the way that this is done is usually through a concept called discourse. So discourse is about the production of knowledge through language. And it's produced and guided by power and power relations. So those in power produce the framework for knowing and understanding the powerless. And these concepts provide the framework for how we know and understand our world and our society. So if we kind of think about them as a cyclical process, so, you know, knowledge contributes to power, and power power subjects an individual and you know, to control, or, you know, whether it's through institutions or through laws. This is where, you know, people would be, the human bodies would be the subject, right? And discourse, so the way we communicate, discourse is how we come to understand the world. So the ways in which we talk, you know, and the language that we're using, you know, our framework, I guess, right? Like whose perspective we're taking, that is what connects these all three of these beings. So just to explain that and make that a little bit clear, it's the way power usually operates in discourses is through binary opposition. So historically, the West assumed cultural superiority was developed by building upon a history of artificial stereotypes about the East, and these stereotypes became so pervasive that they were unquestionable. So, because the West was in power, they interpreted the East as lacking government and civil society, prone to barbaric cultural practices, and completely backwards and savage compared to Western refinement and civilization, right? So what language, what perspective are we taking that establishes these binary oppositions of white, black, good, bad, us, them, civilized, uncivilized, the West, the rest, right? So the West and the rest is a phrase coined by Stuart Hall, who's a cultural theorist, and what he means by that is the way that we view the West as being, culturally superior, as more progressive, as more civilized, as more advanced in society and technology, but and then everything else is the rest, right? So it's all other countries in the world. The East is they're all kind of compiled together under the category of the rest, right? Because the idea is that it doesn't really matter, because the West is what the framework is, right? That's they hold it's kind of this idea of, because they're the center of the world, I guess. And so we kind of have to ask ourselves, how does power and superiority frame what we know of Western countries, and how it frames what we know of Africa and Asia, right? Who controls the narrative about Black people, and what binary oppositions do you know or recognize in your own life and community, right? So just to go over how this operates. So power produces forms of knowledge, right? And then knowledge is used to modify and redistribute and stabilize power, right? And then power is established through institutions which control subjects, and the subjects are constitutes the power. So it's a very cyclical process in which our language and our framework of understanding the world, our societies, is established, right? So in what ways do we think in what ways do we establish binaries and of good, bad, us, them, civilized, uncivilized, superior, inferior, the West, the rest, right? So again, we have to always ask ourselves, what perspective are we taking when we're hearing this story? What perspective is this story written? What perspective is history being told from? And what perspective is the media presenting when we're watching the news, right? So again, I think we always, the key question for this seminar would be, always ask yourself, who controls the narrative about Black people, right? That's what we always have to think about. And these are concepts that we're gonna go over again and again. So if you don't completely understand, it's okay. We're gonna repeat it and clarify it as we go on, because these concepts are very central to understanding our historical processes, right? So it's all about, like, we have to think about how power is established and who holds power over others in our society. So the film 13th. Okay, so the documentary by Ava DuVernay examines how the United States has produced the highest rate of incarceration in the world, with majority of those imprisoned being African American. And the title of the film refers to the 13th Amendment in the Constitution. And she argues that a prison industrial complex statistically imprisons Black men disproportionately and allows for their disciplinary servitude, and which takes advantage of America's Black population. And she argues that it's a form of modern day slavery. The film addresses the injustice of mass incarceration and race, and how this disproportionately impacts Black and brown people. This is done through the following 4 points. So this is, a quick summary of the film, just the main takeaway points I thought that the film brought. So the first being, African Americans have continually been portrayed as criminals in literature and media. So from the start of slavery, right? From the minute that they were taken from Africa, and from the minute that film and literature came about, society has always believed and has come to believe that Black people are inherently violent and immoral. The more one sees this image and hears the stories of these the more one sees images and hears these stories, the more likely one is to believe that Blackness is criminal and corrupt. So the more ingrained in our minds is what I meant to see, right? So like we believe it's truth, the more and more we see it, right? And the 13th Amendment. So quickly, I just want to state what that is. And that I have this image over here too. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, right? So the 13th Amendment, there is that loophole, right? Except as a punishment for crime, right? That's the key phrase that I think that we have to pay attention to. Because one thing that we have to keep in mind is that when we think about slavery, we have to realize that it was an economic system, and the demise of slavery at the end of the United States Civil War left the Southern economy in absolute tatters. So this presented a big question, because there are 4 million people who were formerly property of people, right? They were property of slave owners, right? And they were formerly an integral part of the economic production system in the South, but now these people are free, right? And so what do you do with these people, and what happens to the economy? How do you build an economy that was built on free labor, right? Because if it's sitting on top of free labor, then it's just going to collapse, right? And so that 13th Amendment loophole was exploited immediately, except as punishment for crime. And so mass incarceration became a replacement for slavery. Since the abolishment of slavery, politicians have implemented policies that feed off the culturally generated fear of Black people. And this disproportionately puts Black people in jail, where they are used as free labor. And this is a new form of modern day slavery. So what that means is prisoners are, like, corporations have prisoners who have been put to work without pay as part of their sentencing. So since the abolishment of slavery, politicians have implemented policies that feed off this media-generated fear of Black criminals, which disproportionately puts Black people behind bars so that they can be used for free labor, which then props up the US economy. So number 3, the third takeaway point from the documentary would be that corporate interests shape the prison population. So the documentary kind of uncovers a coalition called ALEC, which is American Legislative Exchange Council. And it's a coalition of corporate interests like Walmart and Verizon, and they introduce federal policies which arguably result in putting Black people and immigrants behind bars in the interest of profiteering from the success of private prisons, surveillance, and prison labor. And it's a bit scary, because 1 in 4 US legislators have ties with ALEC, and these corporations like Walmart, like Verizon, big, massive corporations, they profit from the success of, again, private prisons, surveillance, and prison labor, right? They make money off of free labor, and they benefit. And so we have to understand that history is not just stuff that happens by accident. We are the products of history that our ancestors chose if we're white, but if we're racialized minorities, if we're Black, we are the products of history that our ancestors most likely did not choose, right? And so we're sitting here as a product of those choices. So we have to understand the context in which these corporations and ways in which Black people are systematically oppressed. It stems from slavery is the argument that the film makes, right? And so ultimately all of this concludes to and leads to the dehumanization of African Americans. So by portraying Black people as criminals, depriving their communities of financial support needed to level the playing field, and developing policies that put more people of color in prison, and creating prison systems intended to break and punish instead of rehabilitating, Black people are consciously and unconsciously dehumanized all the time. Yeah, so let me just go over to see if there was anything else I needed to bring up. Yeah, so quickly, I just wanted to mention these policies that put more people of color in prison, because that's extremely key, right, to understand, is that these policies are what created the infrastructure for mass incarceration. So policies like mandatory minimums, which is taking discretion away from judges, the militarization of police, SWAT teams, the Bill Clinton introduced the 3 strikes law and truth in sentencing laws. So must serve 85% of their sentence. So these policies have detrimentally impacted Black communities, and because it forced a whole generation of leadership of men to be incarcerated, right? So they're the Black community is left standing legless without any support, because all of their men and a lot of their women are being put in prison, right? They're being locked up. And so you're seeing broken families as a result of that. And ultimately it's prisoners for profit, right? And so corporations are profiting from incarceration. And so I want to want us to unsettle the image of prisoner and prisons, right? Because when we hear the word prisoner, certain images and associations immediately do come to mind, right? We think that prisoners are violent, angry, that they have mental health issues, right? That they're poor, they're addicts, they're threatening, corrupt, immoral, right? There's fear associated with them, violence, all of that, right? But this documentary really shows us that the people who are being put in jail are often wrongly convicted, and they are being, because Black people are criminalized at excessively more than any other population in the world. They are thrown in jail more than any other population in the world, right? And so we kind of like, I think it's really important for us to understand that what prisons and being locked up does to humans, right? And what that does to our psyche, right? And our spiritual well-being, right? Because that constant dehumanization, right? Of being told that, of facing violence and because prisons in the US and in Canada, they are meant to break you. They're not meant to rehabilitate you, right? They are meant for you to be serving punishment, not for you to get better, right? And to re-enter society as a better person, right? And so Dolores Canales, or she's a co-founder of California Families Against Solitary Confinement, and she's also a mother of a prisoner who's been in, he has no window in a cell. He's been in solitary confinement for years, and so she said about the process of you immediately become numb. That's what jail does to humans, that immediate dehumanization and sensory deprivation that nobody can really understand unless they have lived through it, right? And so I want us to ask ourselves, how would this constant dehumanization impact the human psyche? How do you think that would impact your spiritual well-being, right? If that was, if that was our community, if that, the Black people are constantly being dehumanized when they are viewed as criminals, when they are thrown in jail, when they face police violence at astonishing rates, right? And so I think they really start to internalize that, and it really deeply affects and traumatizes their communities, right? And I really enjoyed this. I love this quote by Bernice King, who's MLK's daughter or granddaughter, I don't remember. But social justice is love applied to systems, policies, and cultures, right? So systems, policies, and cultures, right? So social justice is not being applied to our prison systems right now because of how much damage it does to the human psyche, right? Our systems are not based on restorative justice. They are created to break you and to punish you, right? And to lock you up, to hide those who hide the unwanted from to the margins of society, to push them away. And I kind of wanted to bring in, another pop culture reference, right? Because I was thinking about when I was watching 13th about how, that dehumanization, that sensory deprivation. And I thought about Azkaban in Harry Potter, right? And I thought about Dementors, right? Because they are such an oppressive presence in the book, right? The book, Harry Potter, is written from it's Harry's perspective, and we know how it particularly impacts him, right? He feels cold, he feels lifeless, he feels like all the joy has been sucked out of him, right? That sensory deprivation is so strong when you're in the presence of Dementors, right? And the name Azkaban was in part derived from a real life prison, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, and in part from the word Abaddon, a Hebrew term that means place of destruction or depths of hell. So Azkaban is meant to be like the scariest of the scariest places in Harry Potter. And I think it's probably one of the most popular prisons or prisons in pop culture, right? Because we see in the story that it really does break the human spirit, right? People who go in come out crazier, right? We see how it impacted our characters like Sirius Black and Hagrid. They went and it destroyed them, right? And they never want to go back. And that's because Dementors, again, it's that oppressive presence, right? And that's what prison kind of does to the human soul, the human psyche, right? That sensory deprivation of being confined, being locked up, and forced to be, isolated in the dark. And so I feel all peace, hope, and happiness is sucked out of the air. And, like Remus Lupin says, get too near a Dementor and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. If it can, the Dementor will feed on you long enough to reduce you to something like itself, soulless and evil. you will be left with nothing but the worst experiences of your life. And I thought when I was watching the documentary, the experiences of some of those young Black men, right, of the young man who committed suicide because, you know, he just couldn't take the experience anymore, right? He did absolutely no crime, absolutely nothing, and he was beat up in prison. He felt like he had no option but to take his own life, right? And I think that's the most devastating thing to be, the most devastating choice to have to make. And when you're in a place like a prison, when you are a prisoner, I want us to really think about how hard it is to keep and contain your inner light, right? To keep that happiness, because the presence, being confined, that sensory deprivation, it just wants to suck the life out of you, right? And it wants to take your light, right? And Dementors, the Dementors kiss, this image right here, right? That's literally what they're doing. They want to suck the light out of you, all the good out of you, right? Every happy memory that you hold, so that you are nothing but a dark, empty shell. And that is kind of what I think the experiences of a lot of the Black community, of Black people, have been, right? Some quotes from the documentary that I pulled because I thought they were so powerful. Corey Green, create a context where people are afraid. And when you make people afraid, you can always justify putting people in the garbage can, right? Fear is the biggest motivation we have with mass incarceration. Fear of Black bodies, because they are seen again as criminal. But we always have to come back to the question of who is framing the narrative, right? Who, how have Black people continuously, again and again, been portrayed as criminal, right? And how does the media, how does the literature, how does the materials, the stuff that we consume feed into that discourse, right? And again, who is holding the power, right? Who is constructing, whose perspective are we looking at this from, right? And how is that influenced by power, right? Dr. Jelani Cobb, if you looked at the history of Black people's various struggles in this country, the connecting themes is an attempt to be understood as full, complicated human beings. We are something other than this visceral image of criminality and menace and threat to which people associate with us, right? So throughout, right, like since the moment that they were taken from Africa, from slavery till present, right, Black people have been continuously being seen as menace and threats, and their revolutions, their struggles, right, of civil rights, it's always fighting back against that stereotype, right? And that's what it comes back to again and again and again. Like they're viewed as threatening bodies. Every Malika Cirilla poet, she said, every media outlet in America thinks I'm less than human. I began to hear the word super predator as if it was my own name. And wow, like that, you really have to think about, I think, how that might impact, again, your soul, your psyche, right? When you hear the word super predator as if that was your own name, right? Because I think you really, as a community, as a people, you start to really internalize that, right? And believe it, because every single source, every single person around you, the community around you, the world you're living in, is telling you that you are a predator, that you're a criminal, right? And so she also says, so you have then educated a public deliberately over years, over decades, to believe that Black men in particular and Black people in general are criminals. I want to be clear, because I'm not just saying that white people believe this, right? Black people also believe this and are terrified of ourselves, right? And I think that is so, so sad, right? That systemically, this narrative, right, of criminality and associated with Blackness, and that has been at the core. That's the core struggle that Black people have been facing for the past 400 years, and that's why they say Black Lives Matter, right? And I think what we have to always think to ourselves is, a two at the end of that statement. Black Lives Matter too, because right now their lives are not being mattered, right? They're not being taken care of. Their communities are not being taken care of, and so now they're demanding to be heard, right? And for society to start recognizing again who is constructing the narrative, who is holding the power and the knowledge, and whose perspective are we looking at when we're consuming these images of Black people and criminality, right? So what would Jesus do? I think our understanding of an experience with criminal justice for a lot of us and would be very limited unless we're directly involved or connected, right? But I think it's interesting because the church is more closely connected to the experience of the prisoner, right? Because Jesus himself was incarcerated. He was a prisoner, right? Jesus's incarceration parallels the life of today's inmates, and he was seen by political leaders, the powers above, as less than a lawbreaker. He was arrested and given an unfair trial, right? And so, Ruben, are you able to read John 18 for us?
Yeah. Okay. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went to it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, Who is it that you want? Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. I am he, Jesus said. And Judas, the traitor, was standing there with them. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, Who is it you want? Jesus of Nazareth, they said. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go. This happened so that the words he had spoken out would be fulfilled. I have not lost one of those you gave me. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Now, verses 19. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I have always taught in synagogues or at the temple where the Jews came together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. Jesus said this. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
Yeah, wow. So that passage, that is a prime example of a broken criminal justice system, right? Jesus was unjustly condemned. He was framed and sentenced by the corrupt, the jury of peers, right? Jesus was given the death penalty. And once convicted and locked up, he was allowed visitors, and in Matthew 25, verse 36, he said, I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me, right? And so I think prisoners who have done their time eventually, return to their community. And I wonder if we can think about the resurrection of Jesus as a parallel to to the returning citizen, a story of second chances, right? A story of rebirth and a story of redemption, right? Because that is what Jesus and God calls for, right? Restorative justice. Because everybody should be able to return, find their relationship with God, to return home to after paying their dues, right? And when Jesus returned, he became fully recognized as the Savior and changed the world, right? So returning citizens, if they're given the right resources, supports, and opportunities, they can be community changers as well, right? But not if our systems are meant to break the spirit, right? And to oppress the spirit. And so I think as we engage with this issue of mass incarceration, one of the most effective ways to connect to this idea is to see them the way God sees them, right? As his children. We have to recognize and acknowledge their inherent worth as people, prisoners, as people who are locked up. We have to recognize their inherent worth as God's creation, right? So Hebrews 13, verses 3 to 5, remember those who are in prison, as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you yourself are in the body, right? And also Luke 4, verses 18 to 19. Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor," right? So, I mean, what would Jesus do, right? So it's, the Bible tells us very clearly what Jesus's opinions on prisons were, right? And so now is a great time for us to go into a discussion, right? So when we, I'll read these questions out loud, and the way I'd like this discussion to go is have it be a big group chat, right? So, and people can participate in whatever ways they feel comfortable.